Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to the Arkham Sessions. Brian Ward here, alongside the uber-smart and talented Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
You're too kind.
First of all, I want to apologize for getting last week's episode up late.
You should.
I know. We had every intention of getting it up on time, but WinterCon really kind of did a number on us, so getting it up was a bit of a hurdle.
That's what she said.
Oh, well done. If you've not heard it yet, you really should. We talk about Adam West, typecasting, hero worship, why Batman's starting to creep me out. It's a really great episode, worth your listen, so go find Beware the Grey Ghost and check it out. This week, I am genuinely excited because we're talking about subjects that are near and dear to me. I've mentioned on the show before that I'm a bit of a magic nut. To be clear, I mean the art of prestidigitation, not the card game. And this week's episode, Prophecy of Doom, falls right into my wheelhouse, not because we're talking so much about magic per se, as we're talking about charlatans and con artists who use a lot of the same tricks of the trade as magicians and other performers.
Right, so these are people who beguile and falsify and mystify and basically just con people, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, this week's episode is called Prophecy of Doom. It was written by Sean Catherine Derrick from a story by Dennis Marks, and it was directed by Frank Power. We open up on an ocean liner casino. Everybody's having a good time, although it appears that most folks are losing. We move down to what appears to be the engine room, and we see a bomb. Within a few seconds, that bomb detonates, and within a very short time, everyone quickly evacuates, and the ship sinks in a scene not so unlike something we'd have seen in Titanic, minus the awkward love triangle and computer-generated people bouncing off of pieces of the ship.
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne is at dinner with Ethan Clarke and his daughter Lisa. Drea, is this a date?
No.
Okay.
It is clearly not. It is two friends, Bruce and Ethan, getting together, meeting up for dinner. Lisa is Ethan's daughter, as you said, who is probably about Bruce's age. She looks maybe slightly younger than he is, but you get the sense that these are a bunch of friends getting together and discussing.
I agree, but
things that are going on.
Once Ethan disappears, Bruce and Lisa are pretty chummy out on the sidewalks together, walking along. Lisa, voiced here by the beautiful Miss Heather Locklear. I don't know. In either case, Ethan is an investment banker, known to take very few risks, which makes it that much more odd that he's seemed to have fallen in with this guy Nostromos, a man who's made a number of accurate predictions over the last few weeks and months, including the one about the ship sinking. And Bruce remembers reading about him in the Star Inquirer.
Alfred likes to pick up a copy now and then.
Lisa is pretty convinced, however, that Nostromos is a fraud, but her father's sucked into this secret brotherhood, which is actually a word that they use, which consists of the wealthiest people in Gotham, except Bruce. At least not yet.
Right.
We're then shown Nostromos at work, rattling off mumbo-jumbo.
The negative plane is aligned with the positive, bringing forth astral harmony.
What?
It all comes down to tonight being a good night for prophecy.
Right, and so Bruce is there. He's in the audience. Our understanding is that he is there to sort of get some more information. He's putting together some evidence because he's quite suspicious of Nostromos, and we can tell from the dinner conversation earlier that he's skeptical, that he is raising an eyebrow. He wonders why Ethan has been believing in what seems to be, a magic trick.
Right.
So, yeah.
And Lisa is obviously concerned about her father, and Bruce wants to look into that. He is in full detective mode here. Nostromo says that the inner voice is telling him that someone's in grave danger, and that someone, of course, naturally, is Bruce Wayne. Bruce, not so much buying it. He goes to the Batcave and finds that Nostromos is none other than failed actor / petty larcenist Carl Fowler, and his known associate is special effects guru Lucas.
Lucas.
Just Lucas. Bruce steps inside his building's elevator, which we see as sabotage to kill him. But Bruce, being Batman and all, he escapes and chases the culprit down, fighting him. But that masked man, who we see as Lucas, gets away.
Now, where did Bruce keep the suit and the grapple hook and the belt?
It's all under the...
He got into that elevator all by himself just a suit.
I'm less concerned about where he kept those, and I'm more concerned about where he left his clothes behind.
Oh, good point.
It is a Wayne owned building. So maybe every elevator has a secret compartment with a bat suit in it, just in case.
Well, now remember, the security guard said that his personal elevator had been going through some maintenance, so he may keep an extra suit in just his personal elevator.
Yeah, it's possible. Nostromos is ticked, though, that Wayne wasn't killed.
Can't you see how his death would have affected the Brotherhood? How vulnerable they would have felt. We could have finally hit them for all they're worth. Peace to all.
He receives a call from Ethan Clarke and learns that a miracle has happened.
Bruce has seen the light.
Bruce comes to the next meeting of the Brotherhood and becomes its next member. And by the way, in this scene where Bruce is telling Nostromos that he's now on board, Bruce is a horrible actor.
It wasn't until that moment, when I came so close to death, that I realized you really did have a divine connection.
Regardless, becoming this new member upsets Lisa.
Not Bruce!
She's kind of over the whole thing, and seeing Bruce sucked in upsets her quite a bit. But it's after this meeting, when speaking with Ethan, that Bruce hears of the Great Fall. This prediction Nostromos is given regarding the economic collapse of the world, and the Brotherhood has been stashing away hundreds of millions of dollars as a financial cushion that's meant to not only protect themselves, but also rebuild the economy. So now we see sort of what Nostromos is up to.
The Great Fall is at hand.
Lisa spies on the meeting and sees all kinds of things from the control room, sort of how the way things work, the projections on the wall, and Nostromos supposedly floating. And she's found and kidnapped by Lucas. And it's at this meeting that we learn that in order to keep up appearances, of course, Bruce Wayne is donating $10 million to the cause.
And to think I was fretting over the electric bill.
Ethan Clarke is called to visit Nostromos at the Brotherhood's lair, which appears to be Gotham's observatory. I'm not entirely sure why that's not open to the public, but he's got a throne room and, all of that. Ethan is told that the funds are in jeopardy. The Great Fall is imminent, and Ethan has to sign over the funds to Nostromos, and he's not so sure about this right away. So Nostromos goes to his ace in the hole, of course, which happens to be his daughter Lisa, strapped to the giant recreation of Mars in the automated solar system up above their heads.
Lisa!
Batman steps in, and the remainder of the episode is basically an elaborate fight, albeit a cool one, within the solar system, and Batman saving Lisa at the last minute before she's cut to pieces by the rings of Saturn, etc. And ultimately, Batman catches Nostromos, or Carl Fowler, and Lucas, and they're prosecuted by the DA, who predicts a life sentence. So that's that. Pretty cut and dry. For starters, Drea, we're clearly dealing with a con man here.
Bruce?
Yes, Bruce. Two-part question here. Let's talk about the psychology of both the con artist and their victims. What does it take to be someone who is so confident and so charming and so alluring as to get money from victims? And on the flip side, what does it take to be the type of person who is going to give that person money?
Well, first, a con artist is short for confidence artist.
Correct.
So a confidence artist is someone who will exploit the characteristics of the human psyche.
Right.
Things like dishonesty, vanity, compassion, irresponsibility, greed, feeling grief, feeling vulnerable.
Okay.
It's not so much that people lack information or that they lack intelligence when they're sort of falling for these tricks. or these cons. They're simply susceptible because of their emotional state, their mood state, or simply the characteristics of the con artist, such as having authority, having characteristics that are very likable, empathizing, trying to connect with the person, and of course, having a reputation, being socially well known, or having a high profile. Nostromos fits all of these characteristics to some level.
Right.
I'll get into some of those details more, but first let's talk about what a scam really is.
Oh, okay.
A scam has two main stages.
Okay.
1, a scammer provides false information and urges a potential victim to act upon it. And 2, the victim acts on the false information and transfers some benefits to the scammer.
Okay.
A recent survey by the Federal Trade Commission found that nearly 26 million Americans had been victims of fraud.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that is that the people who are most susceptible to those scams were 1, risk takers. People who reacted to unsolicited requests, things like those emails you get from the internets.
Right. The Nigerian prince.
Yes, people actually fall for that. 2, people who are grieving, people who had recently experienced some kind of injury, a divorce, a death in the family, a loss of a job. And 3, debtors, people who are desperate to escape their financial troubles.
Right.
So you can see how all these 3 categories are people who are vulnerable to, to being conned.
So people who need either some sort of easy money, or people who need some sort of emotional comfort.
Exactly.
Sort of reminds me, being the fan of magic and the fan of this sort of stuff that I am, this actually reminds me of people who are famous for doing these sorts of things. And that's like the fraudulent psychics and mediums that you see on TV. People like the John Edward, Sylvia Browne before she died, James van Praagh, people who have made names for themselves by supposedly talking to the dead.
The Long Island medium is she's the current cold reader.
She kills me, man. She kills me.
Well,
I mean,
then she could talk to you after she
look,
does that.
that's true. Except that she can't. Just as a bit of a public service announcement, guys, these folks, take it from one person who knows a lot about things that they're doing, not real. They are not speaking to the dead. There are things such as cold readings and hot readings that these folks are using. And if you just do a little bit of research on things like this, you will learn all about the techniques they're using to supposedly talk to the dead. Do not give those people your money, or you will be sort of falling into Nostromos's trap.
Right. And again, I want to reiterate that victims, people who are taken advantage of, are not poor decision makers. They're not people who are unintelligent. They're actually people who are often professionals, right, often successful. Actually, the episode we're talking about in BTAS shows Ethan, a successful business savvy guy,
known for not taking risks.
Exactly.
Well, and it sort of plays on their fear a little bit. I
absolutely.
mean, this guy has predicted the fall of the economy, and he has basically done everything he needs in order to gain their confidence. He has convinced all these people that they need to put this surplus of cash together to protect themselves, and then to eventually rebuild the economy, that it's going to be all up to them. And then he's also done something that is a little bit of a further step to gain their confidence, and that is he has made sure that he has no control of the money.
He can't touch it without my written approval. Nostromos insisted everything be above board.
He can't touch it unless Ethan Clark signs it away to him. Ethan being the representative of the Brotherhood. He has made sure that Ethan has to sign the money over to him before he gets any of it. And of course, that just further puts their faith in this person, because he's clearly not out for himself. He's out to help them. And it's just one of those sort of brilliant steps by a con artist to make you believe that this person is doing this for you.
Right. The other thing I like about this episode is that you have Ethan and Lisa kind of reacting to Nostromos in different ways. Lisa, I like Lisa. She's a young woman who is clearly not falling for it.
Right.
She's bright. She's she scrutinizes Nostromos's methods, and she has conviction that he is basically a con artist who's trying to steal money from her father.
Right.
Meanwhile, her father, as we mentioned, he's essentially taken advantage of. But research actually shows that people who are older, specifically older than the age of 60, are more susceptible to cons.
Why is that?
Well, a recent study done at UCLA showed that it actually has to do with parts of the brain. Older people are especially vulnerable to becoming victims of fraud because of a particular region of the brain that influences the ability to discern who is honest and who is trying to deceive us. So based on a facial expression, based on how someone looks in their emotional expression, their face.
So it's funny, biology is actually counteracting what experience has done. You would think that experience would make these people less susceptible because they've seen it all, but really their brain is shutting that portion down slowly?
Right. So what the study found is that older people fail to interpret an untrustworthy face as potentially dishonest. The reason for this is that it seems like the brain, they specify the anterior insula, which is linked to disgust and is important for discerning, like I said, untrustworthy faces. It's less active in adults who are older than younger adults.
Interesting. This actually sort of, I guess, it explains a lot about con artists in the past. We always hear about them conning older people. This story actually reminds me a little bit of televangelists, where you've got this religious leader, whether it's a pastor or a minister, who's going on air and asking you for money in order to save this or to save that. You look at Jim Bakker in the 80s, this televangelist who received incredible amounts of money that were totally spent on personal things. You know, he and, of course, Tammy Faye Bakker, a lot of people remember them. They were building a religious theme park, Heritage USA, you know, and they were caught in a scam. Benny Hinn. I mean, Benny Hinn was probably one of the worst of them because he actually claimed to be able to perform miracles. He was bringing people on stage. He could heal people. And, you know, you give him your money, even as recent as 2010, when you've got the Too Big to Fail movement, which was Edward Purvis. He ended up with 43 counts of fraud because he was basically telling older people that they would be helping fund overseas religious work. And meanwhile, he's walking away with these millions of dollars. Nostromos reminds me of these sorts of people preying on the older, wealthier, and in some cases not wealthier, but the people who are desperate.
Totally. Right. And that UCLA study actually found that the prototypical victim of financial fraud is a 55-year-old male who is an experienced investor. So it turns out that Ethan is that prototype. He represents that well. So it's pretty, reasonable that he would fall for this. But, I think it's interesting that it is true that there seems to be this neurobiological difference between young people and old people, or older people, where older people seem to have diminished ability to have, to rely on this gut feeling. And the researchers actually have sort of explained that part of the brain that's responsible for discerning honest and versus dishonest faces is kind of a gut feeling type of mechanism.
Getting old sucks.
It does.
And let me just say, when I reach 55 years old, I really hope I'm not an experienced investor, because I'll just start giving my money to all kinds of con artists.
Well, interestingly, the researchers say, of course, say no to these kinds of potential scammers. And around the time that someone is going to be, just collecting their 401k, that's the most vulnerable time to be on the lookout for being taken advantage of. So when you're ready to do that, Just keep that in mind.
Just say no. I'm not
Just
giving
say no.
a dime to anyone, including people I know, just in case. You could all be scammers. So something that you said a minute ago actually makes me wonder, the fact that a psychologist can read people and the fact that a con artist can read people must sort of suggest that whether they are aware of it or not, a con artist must know quite a bit about psychology and what it takes to make a person tick and what's going on in the mind. Talk a little bit about the con artist's use of psychology.
You're absolutely right. There's a psychologist, Dr. Jeremy Dean, who's written about this on his blog. It's called PsyBlog, and he's talked about the couple of experts that have consulted with that TV show, The Real Hustle.
Oh yeah.
It's
The BBC.
Yeah. It's that show. An expert from Cambridge University and the consultant on the show have identified 7 of the major psychological principles that are used by con artists, actually, to con people from their money.
Wow.
Would you like to know about those?
I would absolutely not like to know about a single one of those 7. Okay, go ahead and tell
All
me.
right. In the spirit of good hustlers being good psychologists, I'll share them with you, but please don't abuse them.
Okay.
All right.
People, do not abuse these 7 principles of psychology.
So the first one is distraction. You know about distraction.
Yep.
The classic example of distraction...
I'm sorry, what's that over there? Yeah.
You're terrible. I actually looked.
She did. She actually did. Tell us about distraction.
Okay. The classic example of distraction is that 3-card game.
Oh, 3-card money.
Exactly. Sometimes it's called Find the Lady.
Yep, find a lady. Yep, looking for the queen.
So I don't know too much about the game. It's some kind of rigged game where a person, the magician or con artist is presenting 3 cards and you're supposed to pick the one that the queen or the...
Yeah, typically you're looking for... There are 3 cards. One of them oftentimes is like the Queen of Hearts or Queen of Diamonds. You're looking for the lady. So you go through and it's basically a shell game. You're trying to keep track of which one is the queen or the ace or whatever. Some magicians and some folks on the street will actually let you choose the card, in order to make you feel like you have some control. But of course, it's all sleight of hand. By the time you're picking the card, your card's not even on the table. You and I know one of the better 3-card money, I guess, runners that I've ever seen, a magician by the name of John Armstrong. Mm-hmm. You can follow him on Twitter at CardJohn.
He is a fantastic card magician.
One of the best close-up magicians I have ever seen in my life. I'm fortunate to call him a friend. This guy can do 3-card money so incredibly well. In fact, he even has worked it into his act. But yeah, these guys are fantastic. But I saw a guy do it in Vegas. I was crossing one of the bridges, saw a guy on the street doing it. This guy clearly a bit unscrupulous, not doing it for the fun of the performance, doing it for the money.
Right. Well, let's be clear. Our buddy John is a magician.
He will let you know.
He's not a con artist. He's not a con artist. He doesn't take your money.
He actually has worked it into his act, and he makes it clear from the beginning, I'm better than you are at this, and I will screw you out of your money. So, there's a difference between someone who does it for performance and a person who does it on a bridge
for gain
in Las Vegas. Never put money down on this, folks.
Well, the one thing, that people may not realize is it's always a setup, as you said. So distraction comes into play in many ways here. There may be a person, an onlooker who's actually in on it and distracts with, banter, laughter, anything to get the eyes off of the cards for even just a moment and onto something else. It is the classic example of distraction.
And by the way, let me just say, if you are really good at this, you don't need the second person. That's amateur hour.
Right. The idea is that the person you are conning doesn't notice what they don't notice,
Right.
right? So the psychology here is that the mind is designed to fill in the gaps for us. And so when they don't see that sleight of hand or that part of the trick, they just assume that it continues to be in the spot that they thought it was. So distraction is one of the principles of conning. The second principle is social compliance. We know that humans are especially willing to do things when an authority figure tells them to do something.
Okay.
There's actually a study, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the Milgram obedience experiment done at Yale University.
That's the one with where he split the two teams up. One was like the authority and one was the people.
Mm-hmm. Milgram was a psychologist and researcher who actually wanted to ask the question, could it be that Adolf Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices?
It's actually interesting that you bring that up. I mean, in terms of can you actually call them accomplices for following orders? Adolf Eichmann was, of course, the man who is sort of principally known as the person who created the final solution. He's the mastermind, the architect behind enslaving Jewish people, taking them to camps, and actually killing them.
All the atrocities of the Holocaust.
All of that.
Right.
He was actually put on trial and he was hanged for doing this. Could you say that those people that he then told to round up and enslave and ultimately kill were accomplices to his crimes?
The response, of course, everyone remembers this, was, I was just following orders.
I was just following orders, yeah.
Yeah. So this is probably one of the most well-known psychology research experiments, in our history. For folks that are not familiar with it, the setup is like this. There's a newspaper ad that says that you can get paid a few bucks to be involved in this experiment. Ultimately, 40 men responded to this ad, and they were introduced to this intimidating shock generator. So imagine that you see, a series of switches, and in the beginning you'll see something like slight shock, and it gets increasingly worse. So slight shock, medium shock, and at the very end it says danger, severe shock. And then the final two switches were simply labeled with XXX.
Okay. So you get hardcore porn at the end.
No. That means like there's no turning back from this, right? Like
okay.
death.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's also that. Yeah.
Each participant, I think they randomly pulled a label from a hat. It actually wasn't random, but they were told there will be a teacher and a student. And the two participants chose the piece of paper randomly, and of course everybody got teacher.
Okay.
The student is a Confederate, is someone who is part of the experiment.
Okay.
So everybody gets teacher, and as part of the experiment, the participant would go through a series of quote unquote teaching the student something. So inevitably, the student would get it wrong, and so the teacher would be told by this authority figure, a person in a white lab coat, an older gentleman, an expert in the field, telling them you must increasingly hit that switch your comrade, as your colleague in the other room is getting shocked. So you don't see the other person. You are you're in separate rooms. Once the 300 volt level had been reached, the learner / the person in on it starts banging on the wall and demands to be released. So of course, most of us would say, should I stop? Is it okay to stop? And when that comes into question, the experimenter will say, please continue. If asked again, the experimenter will say, the experiment requires that you continue. Now, at some point, you hear screaming in the other room as you're increasingly, hitting, those switches.
Right?
And at some point, the learner is completely silent and you hear nothing. Of course, if you turn to the experimenter or ask if you can stop, you're told it is absolutely essential that you continue. If you ask again, you're told you have no other choice. You must go on.
Okay.
Now, how many do you think? There were 40 participants in this initial study. How many do you think actually flipped that switch all the way to that last XXX shock?
40.
Wow, you really are not thinking of humanity in a positive light, are you?
I'm just like Batman. I don't think of them positively.
Well, 26. It's still quite astounding. 26 delivered the maximum shocks, and 14 stopped before reaching the highest levels. And the researchers point out that the subjects were all extremely agitated, in distress, angry at the experimenter. They weren't simply, flipping those switches with gusto. They were clearly doing something that they felt was against their moral judgment.
Okay, but they still did it.
They did.
So what you're saying is it is possible that the Nazi guards at Auschwitz didn't like what they were doing, but were doing it because an authority figure was telling them to do it.
Right. And remember, the comments or the directives were, you must continue, you must go on, you can't stop. No one was told, if you walk away, you'll be harmed, or if you stop now, you will be punished. Clearly, I would assume that with Nazi Germany, there were potentially incredible consequences if you didn't obey authority.
You could be shot. You could be...
Exactly. So the study was groundbreaking because it found that simply a person of authority instructing somebody to harm someone else was potentially could potentially occur with any kind of person. These people were not selected because they had any kind of antisocial personality characteristics.
Right.
They were chosen randomly. So now remember, nobody was actually shocked. There was no shock machine that didn't exist. This was all, part of the experiment to see what humans are capable of. And Milgram put it best. He said, ordinary people, simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part, can become agents in a terrible, destructive process.
Okay.
This has to do with hustling because what Milgram found is true to this day. Relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority.
Okay.
If someone of authority, asks you to do something and you truly believe that they have command over you, that they have some information that you don't, and you may be in this power dynamic, you are more likely to follow their order. Hustlers know about this. They know about this and happily exploit our deference to authority figures. People hand over credit cards, car keys, passwords on the internet, things that you normally are told do not do this. And they readily do so if they see, a company jacket, if they see a website that looks official, if they see, somebody that fits that particular role of authority. So it's something that we should be careful of.
Right.
The third psychological principle that con artists use is the herd principle.
Ooh, yeah.
People are sheep. They follow each other. And a classic study on conformity was actually done back in the 50s by Solomon Asch. This is another one of those really popular, well-known psychology studies having to do with conformity. And in this particular experiment, people were brought in and asked to take a vision test. So they would look at lines on a screen and of course, they are the only ones who are taking the so-called vision test. The other two people in the room are Confederates. They're all in on it.
Okay.
So what happens is that the two other people in the experiment, they're actually looking at a series of lines, and they're asked, I think they're asked which one is the longest or which one is the shortest. And the two other folks agree on one that clearly isn't the longest or isn't the shortest. But, the subject, the participant, hears their responses and actually changes their response. It's inaccurate in the sense that what they see isn't what these folks are saying is the longest line, but they conform to that response and say, okay, I choose line C, even though what they're seeing is not the case. So why do you think people would just lie and say that, oh, okay, I'll go with the answer that those two other people before me said?
It's like we were saying with Two-Face Part 1, and hypnosis with Harvey, you don't necessarily want to be the person who didn't see it.
Exactly. People don't want to face ridicule. They don't want to be wrong. And some of them actually believed, well, those other two folks may be smarter than me, so I'm just going to go with what they said. This also goes back to that 3-card trick, the find the lady.
3-card money, yeah.
Yeah, in that if other people say, oh, I think it's the middle one, you may also believe that, or you tend to go with that as well. So, there's a lot of influence based on the people around you. The next 3 principles are dishonesty, deception, and need and greed. Those are pretty straightforward, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are various ways, as you mentioned, that con artists can make a person see what they want to see, or play out their vulnerability if they're grieving, if they're in debt, those kinds of things. So that's what need and greed get to. And finally, time pressure is the last principle. It's really important because research shows that when we have to make decisions in a short period of time, we have this, it's called an affect heuristic. We rely on our emotions rather than actual judgment and thinking.
So if a con man says you've got 24 hours, or else I've got to go to something else, or else our window closes.
Right. When there's no time to think, people rely on shortcuts and emotional responses in a situation. Of course, The Real Hustle is a show, but again, this information was actually published in a paper by Cambridge University. So if folks want to learn more about the cons that were investigated, they can look up this article by Stajano and Wilson from 2009, and the journal is the Technical Report.
Cool.
Now you have studied and you've experienced firsthand the process of hot readings and cold readings.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Okay, so, well, they're basically cold readings and hot readings are what these supposed psychics use in order to get information off of you. So if I walk into a room with 20 people and I say, I'm getting a feeling someone has passed. It's somebody with an M name, like a Mary, or it's a female M name. Odds are good that someone in that room has someone with an M name who passed away. Mm-hmm. So obviously, the bigger the group, the better your odds of being right. Mm-hmm. So you could even take that a step further and say it's someone with an M name. It's like a Mary or a Margaret or something along those lines. It's like a mother figure. Not really a mother figure. It's like a grandmother. Maybe it was your mother, but she's a grandmother. Some
right. So inevitably, someone is going to relate to
someone has that. So then they say, "Oh, that's me." And then you say you use cold reading. So essentially, you don't know anything about this person, but you're reading their body language. You're if they nod, if they smile, that's reinforcing the path that you're using in order to get this information from people. So if you say something to the effect of, this person liked games. They really like playing games, like board games, maybe. Like I'm getting a vision of like checkers, something along that. And someone's like, "Oh, chess. They really like chess." Right, chess. That's kind of what I'm getting. So they're showing me this. They're showing me that. So
it sounds like they're just taking guesses.
They're taking guesses, and they're looking for you to give them a positive response. Mm-hmm. If you don't give them a positive response, what they do then is they say something. If you say, "Did the person like to play games?" No. But I'm getting like a game sort of connection. Maybe that means that they were really strategic. They thought a lot. They were heavy.
Oh, they're very
heavy,
smart.
Right. They're very sometimes I get things like I get images of games like chess. Like chess is strategy. So this person was very strategic, right? Right. Oh yeah, but they were in the army. Right. They were in the army. Okay, so they're showing me that they were strategic mind. They were so they will take misses and turn them into hits. Now, if you're doing a hot reading, that would be like if I came in, and trust me, all of the contemporary, the John Edwards, Sylvia Browne, before she died.
Long Island medium.
Long Island medium. These people have a tendency to do what's also called a hot reading. And that is that you're not going in cold. You know information about these people. So maybe your show producer called someone up and said, "Oh, I hear you want to be on the show. Who are you looking to talk to?" "Oh, I'm looking to talk to my mother." "Oh, you're looking, so you're wanting to connect with your mother. Oh, that's very sweet. I'm trust me, none of this is going back to the Long Island medium. What was your mother's name?" "Oh, my mother's name was Mary. She loved playing chess. She, oh, it was her favorite thing in the world. Oh, this is good information to have. Thank you very much." And then they will feed this information to the Long Island medium or to John Edward or to whomever.
Or they'll go so far as if there's a live show or taping of some sort, they'll have microphones in the green rooms and in lines and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. What they'll do is you will be in a room and you think you are just talking with your buddy or your husband or your wife next to you, but really there are mics in the area that are picking up what you're saying. And if you tell your husband or your wife, "Well, I'm really hoping my mother comes through. Oh, she used to have this toy that she would put by my bedside," or whatever, those people will then pick up on that. And they will say, "John Edward, go to the person in the third row, second seat. That person is looking to go for their mother. They're looking for a toy that they used to put next to the bedroom." One of the most famous cases of something along these lines, they still do it today, but one of the most famous cases was this evangelist by the name of Peter Popov. And Peter Popov actually his wife used to be in a control room and they used to do interviews of people. And then she would tell Peter up on stage through...
Oh, like a bug in the ear.
Through a bug in the ear, such and such back corner looking to talk to their mother. Or this person has this affliction. This person has polio, wants to whatever. And then he would as if mystically, I'm getting a sense of Jimmy. Young Jimmy, you've got polio. Let me... come up here. Let's, and then he would, do these things. One of the most famous debunkers, in fact, he's a great hero of mine, James Randi, the amazing Randi, who has spent a great deal of his life debunking these people because he was a magician.
Debunking their abilities.
Debunking their abilities. He is a magician. He's a performer, and a fantastic performer. But he doesn't like anyone who tries to take advantage. So he actually started up the James Randi Educational Foundation, and they have had for decades now an offer on the table, $1 million to you if you can prove, based on a series of tests agreed upon by yourself and the James Randi Educational Foundation. If you can prove without a shadow of a doubt that you hold some sort of paranormal or supernatural or psychic ability, if you've got one of these abilities, he will hand you $1 million if you can prove it. To this day, no one has been able to claim the $1 million. And people used to go to James Van Praagh. They still go to John Edward, Sylvia Browne before she died. They would go into places like Larry King, or they would go to some other talk show. And then inevitably, these people would say, "So why haven't you accepted the $1 million challenge?"
Right.
They always deflect. They always say, "Well, I don't need the money."
Or this is my gift. I don't want to take money for something
I don't need to prove myself. I'm not always right. I'm not always, I don't need to prove myself to people who are skeptics. If you're skeptics, you're going to be skeptics. I really can't do anything about that. And then also, John Edward is actually one of my favorites because he actually went on to a show, I believe it was Larry King. He was on Larry King Live, and Larry King asked him, "Are you ever going to take James Randi up on his $1 million challenge?" And John's only response was, "Why would I ever accept a challenge from someone with an adjective as a first name? The amazing Randi." So
What?
He couldn't even say yes or no. Like, he deflected and turned it into an insult, a weird insult of James Randi being known as the Amazing Randy in his professional career. So these people can't pass these tests because there is no way to pass them. Right. At least none that we have ever, seen. So when you're talking about, and by the way, James Randi also was famous in the 70s for debunking the abilities of Uri Geller, who was building up quite a following. This is a guy who used to bend spoons. And he would go onto shows and he would show that he has this psychic ability to bend spoons and break spoons using only his mind. And this is a classic parlor trick. I mean, there are magicians who to this day go to the Magic Castle or go onto television or go wherever, and they do this. But somehow or another, Uri Geller was getting these people, this cult following. And James Randi saw that this was dangerous. Actually went onto the Tonight Show, provided Uri Geller with a set of spoons and silverware, and wouldn't let Uri leave until he bent something. And finally, at the end of the night, Uri Geller was basically like, "Oh, I'm not feeling it. The psychic, the vibes, they're not right on this. I can't do it." He continually explained to people how this man was doing this trick. And he's been doing that, for a long time. There are other people. Penn and Teller have been debunking mystics and psychics. Darren Brown, who used to spend a great deal of time as a psychic, as a stage psychic, is very open about the fact that it's all performance. And he's very open about cold and hot readings. So this sort of stuff, it just gets to me. And I feel for the people who are manipulated by it, but it's one of those things that can be very dangerous if used the wrong way.
Right. And I mean, I think we make the distinction between a magician and an illusionist who entertains and makes it very clear that their tricks are just fantastic tricks. Sleight of hand, distraction, all those things, but they're very honest that they are clearly, I think I'm more impressed by someone who is so skilled that they can make me see something that actually didn't happen versus someone who is trying to, trying to trick me by trying to make me believe that they have a supernatural power. There's a huge difference there.
I can do one better than that. And that is James Randi was once performing the spoons, the bending of the spoons. And he was performing in front of a group of people, and a professor, I believe it was like Buffalo University or something like that, stands up and says, this man is a fraud. To which James says, "You're absolutely right, sir. I am a fraud. I'm a fake. I'm a charlatan. I'm a phony. This is what I do. I use trickery to do this." And the guy says, "No, you're trying to make us think you're using trickery when really I believe you have psychic powers." And true story. Like,
that's awesome.
Like the guy was like, no, you're telling us it's something we could all do.
Right.
But I believe you have the ability to do this.
And that's actually exactly why I like this episode of Batman the Animated Series, because Bruce is clearly a man of science. He's skeptical. He's even annoyed by Nostromos. He's really invested in collecting evidence to show that this man is a fraud. And he absolutely dislikes the idea that this man is stealing from people. So, he's very much wanting to take him down.
Right.
And so I like that this is showing that side of Bruce. Although he doesn't spend a lot of time in this episode debunking all of Nostromo's, little tricks, we do see some interesting parts of the episode, like the hook in Nostromos's robe.
Yeah, in the back of the robe.
Yeah, no one really points it out, but we see it, and that kind of indicates that he is on some kind of pulley system or
and
wire.
Batman uses it to his advantage when he actually lifts Nostromos up and starts moving him around, but they don't ever call it out.
He's also, when Bruce is in the during the performance, when Nostromo says that something is going to happen to Bruce, Bruce's glass shatters.
Right.
And later, Bruce explains,
Psychic vibrations, Alfred. Though I'd bet on a high-frequency sonic device.
so again, he's looking at what is the most plausible? What are the scientific or reasonable explanations for these things, rather than this man clearly has supernatural powers?
Right. Yeah, we've talked a lot about real life examples of these people. I mean, we've talked about the televangelists, Jim Bakker, Benny Hinn. We've talked about Uri Geller and Peter Popov and Edward Purvis. We've talked about these folks. I think that we would probably look at Nostromos and we would say that more than likely, I think it's safe to say that Nostromos is probably best described as a modern-day Rasputin, and with a number of these other fraudsters thrown in, for sure. For those who aren't aware of Gregory Rasputin, he was the chief advisor to Nicholas II, the Romanov family in Russia. He was actually brought in. He was actually brought in because the Tsar's only son. I think Nicholas had 3 daughters, and then his son was born, and he was the heir to the throne, Alexei. And he was born with hemophilia, and this was a disease that was passed down from his wife, Alexandra, and they were trying to keep it quiet, but ultimately, he ended up getting very sick, and they ended up going to doctors. They ended up going to other healers, and they really couldn't make anything work. So they eventually called in Gregory Rasputin, who was basically a pilgrim, a religious pilgrim. He believed, other people believed that he was some sort of faith healer and a wise prophet, and he essentially became the most powerful man in the kingdom because he was actually successful, relatively, where others weren't. And next thing you know, Alexei is getting better and is starting to feel better. And this really secured Nicholas's wife, Alexandra's faith in Rasputin. And Rasputin then ended up kind of running the country by telling the Tsarina, the empress, what to do. And she'd tell Nicholas, and because ultimately Nicholas was sort of a pretty weak czar. Rasputin was actually so polarizing in that for some, he was a man of faith with whom God walked. I mean, really, basically, until she died, Alexandra was defending Rasputin. And others, however, thought that he was a charlatan. There were several plots for assassination, and to my knowledge, there was at least one actual attempt that was nearly fatal. I mean, he was stabbed in the stomach, nearly killed. And eventually he was murdered. And so he definitely, when you look at the character of Nostromos, you can kind of get that feeling of Rasputin, a dark figure who's basically a mythical figure at this point. I mean, even his own death has become exaggerated over the decades since it happened. So yeah, I would say that Nostromos is probably a cross between Gregory Rasputin and then all of these other people that we've talked about. Or all these other kinds of people that not specifically those people, but that's all that I have from here. What about you? Any final thoughts on Prophecy of Doom?
No, I think it was a well-written, clearly fascinating episode that, that teaches us a bit about where Bruce stands. And yes, Batman saves the day. He saves Lisa. He saves Ethan. That's all necessary as part of the episode. But I think we learn quite a bit about trusting people, about the idea that people may take advantage of you, the idea that the supernatural is really just a myth. I think there are some really important themes and topics that this brings up.
Yes. So be careful out there, especially as you get older. Anyone 55 or older, you're screwed. I'm sorry.
If anyone is interested in reading more about these topics, especially the psychology of con artists, I have some recommended readings.
Excellent.
The first is a book written by Simon Lavelle. He's a magician, but also someone who knows everything about the way con artists work. It's called How to Cheat at Everything. A con man reveals the secrets of the esoteric trade of cheating, scams, and hustles.
I believe Simon is also, if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the consultants on the TV show White Collar with the con man.
Interesting. The other book is by Robert Cialdini, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who wrote Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. That book goes over a number of psychological principles like authority, reciprocation, liking, the things that we mentioned today.
Right.
We mentioned Cyblog, written by Dr. Jeremy Dean.
Yes.
Cyblog is an awesome website that has a lot of evidence-based resources for people interested in this kind of pop culture. And finally, for the psych nuts out there who want to look up Stanley Milgram's work, one of the most cited papers he wrote is called The Perils of Obedience from 1973 by Harper's Magazine. In Harper's Magazine.
Great. So that's it for this episode. As always, you can reach us on Twitter. We are at Arkham Sessions. I'm at bward028. Drea, where can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can also email us. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can also visit Drea's website, underthemaskonline.com, and email her from there. And that's about it. Join us next week. It's going to be an exciting episode. Feet of Clay. I know. We get to deal with
excited.
Clayface.
Yay!
Very excited about that. So join us next Tuesday. Till then, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
The Arkham Sessions.